Welcome to Praise Hands, home of the Praise Hands, where we are all about creative, cross-cultural Christianity. I'm your host, Robbie Valderrama. This episode is brought to you by thechurchahead.com, resources and advice for forward-thinking Christian leaders. As you know by now, this podcast examines the American intersection of church, race, music, and economics. As a Korean American in the Christian music industry, today's guest has spent much of his life at the intersection of these four topics. Our guest is my old youth pastor, Wisdom Moon. Wisdom has worked with many major names in the Christian music industry, including Lauren Daigle, Houghton, and Darlene Zschech, and has an incredible marketing company that helps churches and Christian artists share their music with the world. During this episode, Wisdom shares about being bullied in school as an immigrant, about working as a racial minority in the Christian music industry, and about why he's more encouraged than ever at where the music of the church is headed. I can't wait for you to hear this. Let's dive right in. All right, so I am here with Wisdom Moon. He is the founder of marketingwithwisdom.com, indieartistuniversity.com. He's pretty much the godfather of Christian music podcasts, and he's also a notorious prankster.
So you never know what he's going to do. You just always have to be on your toes. And he's got this kind of straight face, like, poker face that you don't know if, he's selling your soul to someone or if he's, just what's going on. So you got to stay on your toes. But, so far I'm still alive. So I guess I keep hanging out with him.
Yeah. I have a few people that still don't know to this day that they've been pranked by me.
And the videos haven't shown up on YouTube yet?
No.
So let's talk about our friendship and our story. We've known each other for probably close to 20 years now.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And you were actually my youth pastor, so I'm sure I've got some stories on you, and I'm sure you've got even more on me.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember you walking around at church, sucking your thumb with your blanket,
So I remember this one time we were at a youth retreat in Santa Cruz, and I just started playing guitar, and you'd been playing as well. I think you started off playing bass before that or something, and I just learned this new chord, like the E chord up in the 7th and the 9th fret. I was like, check this out, Wisdom. Like, what do you think about this? And I was like, you should learn this. He's like, nah, it's too hard. Like, I was like, oh my gosh, really? And but no, you were a big inspiration for me as I was just starting to lead worship, getting to see someone that was kind of that next, not like my parents' age, but a little bit older than me, that wasn't just going through the motions, but really was was passionate and sold out for Christ. So thank you for the influence you've always been in my life, and I'd love seeing your consistency and just even how you've grown over the years, and like just little ideas that you get, like buying a different domain name every month. Like, I was thinking about, I was like, I think I probably have over the course of our friendship, I've probably had maybe 15 to 20 different email addresses for you, at different times. Like some people are serial domain buyers. I feel like you're in your sleep probably buying them, taking over the world. But
yeah, I literally have to refrain from buying every domain name I think of.
Right. No, it's real. The struggle is real. So for those listening and watching that didn't grow up with you as their youth pastor, tell us.
Thankfully, most of them haven't.
Thankfully, most of them less counseling sessions.
Yeah.
Tell us about Wisdom Moon. Who are you? What are you most passionate about? And why do you do what you do?
Yeah, I mean, I still don't know how to play the E chord. And I didn't even realize that I said that back then. So yeah. It's still true. It's too hard, But yeah, I mean, really, I'm really passionate about worship. I'm passionate about serving other people and helping them really discover their calling and do marketing the right way. I've done marketing for about 13 years now and kind of stumbled into it back in the MySpace days when I started my podcast. And I didn't know what I was doing. And I set up this really, talking about domain names, I set up this really ugly looking Flash website. I think it was allaboutworship.net at the time because .com was taken. And then eventually I was able to grab it from somebody. Yeah, that's really my initial introduction to marketing and podcasting and web design. And from there, like, I've had the privilege of working with different artists and record labels and churches, helping them with marketing. And I've been a huge fan of Christian music since I was about 10. My family and I moved to California from South Korea. We were immigrants, and at about 10 years old, someone introduced me to Christian music and K-Love.
Okay.
They've been around that long.
Wow.
Yeah, and I literally had this like little stereo cassette player thing, and I would tune into K-Love with the dial, and sometimes I would record it on the cassette tape.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Press record and play at the same time.
Yeah. So that's when I really fell in love with Christian music. And then about 1998, when I discovered like this whole modern worship movement, I started to really dive into that. Went to conferences and started to really like love worship songs, and started to write my own worship songs, and then got to work with some of my heroes in that space, worship songwriters and artists. So yeah, really, like, I'm passionate about connecting people, and I guess I kind of see myself as a strategic person with marketing and just overall like brand strategy and things like that. So
yeah, no, that's so good. So you mentioned your family history of moving from Korea when you were 10. One of the things that we talk about on this show is race, and specifically the theme is examining the American intersection of church, race, music, and economics. So how has your background and your lens as a Korean American shaped the way that you see the world and the church and even Christian music?
I'm actually Black. So
really?
People who can't see, it's funny because I think in my teen years, especially when I was like super into hip hop and like doing rap albums
Cross
and stuff.
movement.
Yeah. When I would talk to people on the phone, they thought I was either Black or Hispanic.
I remember that. You used to sound super Black.
They never like imagined me being Asian. But yeah, when we moved at 9 years old to California, like the Silicon Valley area, at that time, it wasn't really diverse. And at my school, I think I was like one of the only 2 Asians.
Wow.
And I had a friend who was like the only Black kid in the whole school. And so I got picked on a lot, and just had so much racism, which is really crazy to think about now, because in this, in that area now, like Asians are the majority, they're not the minority. So it's really crazy to see that even shift in that, area. But yeah, growing up, I really, moving here, just like I was in culture shock because I didn't know English. All I saw of America was like TV shows, and like cartoons. And moving here, like, realizing I was very different from everybody else, and they didn't know what to do with it. And, when you're in 4th grade, like, it's easier to make fun of somebody than try to understand them, so
for sure.
Like I was always made fun of, and I never even knew what they were saying, but I knew they were making fun of me. And, I really dealt with a lot of anger and like depression. And I was already growing up like very reserved and shy and quiet, but that even made it worse for me. And one day I remember in 4th grade, I was standing in line waiting to go into class from recess. And this other Asian kid, I think he was Vietnamese, in my same class, he came up to me and like made fun of me for something. I don't know what exactly he did. But I remember I was so furious because he was the only other Asian kid, and he was making fun of me.
Can I get one brother out here?
Yeah. So I literally punched him in the gut, and he started crying. And the teacher came out, and she was upset, but like she didn't send me to the principal's office because she knew like my situation, and she basically told me never to do it again. But it was like that moment of like, wow, I'm getting like racism from another Asian, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a really like hard time like growing up in that. And I grew up in public school all my life and dealt with a lot of that. And now like, you know, just being able to see some of that shift, you know, because growing up in school, everybody called me Chinese. Like they didn't know what Korea was, like where it was on the map or anything. So I was always called Chinese and had like all these Chinese jokes that I heard. I'm like, I'm not even Chinese.
Yeah. And when it comes to these issues of race, it's kind of one of those things where those people that made fun of you in fourth grade, like you were just the other. There wasn't a context probably for them of, wow, I could go to Korea and be the only white person in my class. But it was, no, you're the other. Yeah. Just period. And I feel like a lot of times, even in today's church, it can be really easy for us to just assume, oh, like this is just the normal way that we do things. This is just normal, and everybody does things differently as other. How do we move forward and not be those fourth grade bullies, you know, as Christian music, and assume that everyone should be like us? Obviously, there's a commercial side to it where there's marketability and things like that, but as a church, I believe we have a responsibility to make sure that the definition of Christian in our culture is defined theologically and by who Christ is more than it is defined commercially, and that people who feel maybe outside of the church's marketing dollars don't feel outside of the church.
Yeah, I mean that's a big one. You know, I was in Nashville for a few years and worked at different record labels. I'm good friends with a lot of them and still do a lot in Christian music, and have a lot of clients there in that space, whether it's artists or churches doing music or labels. And I'm one of the few Asians in the industry, and I'm one of the few minorities in the industry, whatever that term means, you know? So, you know, for me, like I always value diversity. And I think, you know, whenever you can have people of different backgrounds come, you know, sit in around the table and have a conversation and brainstorm and throw out ideas, the better, you know, ideas you're going to get and better, you know, results you're going to get out of, you know, those brainstorms and conversations. I think so much of Christian music right now, and really it has been for a long time, it's very vanilla, you know. I don't know if like I'm supposed to be politically correct on this podcast, but you know,
I'd rather honesty.
Yeah. And you know, even I was listening to this like playlist of a bunch of new releases today, Christian music, and I'm like, so much of it just sounds the same. And I was literally listening to one song going like, I feel like I like already heard this song weeks ago. How can this be a new release? Like it's either a re-release of an old song or it just sounds like everything else that's already out, you know?
And the problem is that you don't know the difference.
Yeah.
And you're not sure which one it is.
Yeah. And, you know, even if you look at the CCLI chart, which is the top worship songs, you know, in the US, and they have it for different countries. When you look at the names of the people that wrote those songs, majority of them have been written by middle-class Caucasian male.
Right.
And that's just the fact. You know, anybody can look that up and see, you know, that there isn't much diversity in, you know, worship songwriting or Christian music songwriting, or even if you listen to Christian radio, you know, the major artists, you know, thankfully we see more of that now than probably we have ever. But, you know, to me, like, I think there's something missing in Christian music where, you know, we can celebrate diversity and there's not this expectation of the minority artists covering these big songs by Caucasian artists, but not the other way around, you know? Right. So somehow we expect like big modern worship songs to, you know, translate well to gospel or R&B or whatever, hip hop, but then we don't really have that same expectation the other way, you know?
Right. So, why do you think that is?
I think part of it is what you were saying, marketability. And especially, with a lot of marketing and Christian music driven by radio, the radio target audience and their avatar is a middle-class Caucasian person, So, yeah, Becky. And they like to listen to things that are familiar to them and that, make them feel good and safe. And it's that sound, there's a particular formula and a particular sound that tests well in radio. And yeah, I mean, I think that's a piece of the reason, but I'm sure it's a very complicated issue and I'm not smart enough to figure that out. So.
Right. No, and just for our listeners, like that testing, what that means is it's basically when a label or somebody wants to know, hey, how is this song going to do commercially? What they do is they send it off for testing and it gets sorted by how people in different demographics responded to it. And basically this avatar of Becky is kind of this Caucasian, middle class soccer mom.
Yeah.
That basically, if she responds well to it on the tests, then it usually gets, the green light to go to radio. If she doesn't respond well to it, it usually doesn't get the green light.
Yeah.
And so you have a scenario where basically that demographic ends up determining what's called Christian in terms of radio, at least. So maybe let's talk about streaming, because radio, there's a more, I guess, maybe hierarchical, if you would, or very clear chain of command in terms of how this process happens of song selection to distribution. With streaming, it's kind of this whole concept of user generated content where now Spotify is buying, companies and doing partnerships with DistroKid and these things where you can actually upload directly to Spotify and from there distribute it elsewhere. Do you see the streaming world with Apple Music and Spotify maybe democratizing the playing field and making it easier for different types of diverse music to be, more well-known within the Christian realm of things?
Yeah, to an extent, I think, streaming is definitely helping and playlists, but some of the bigger playlists, they still kind of mold it to that demographic. And so some of the songs or some of the bigger playlists are the same songs you're going to hear on Christian radio.
Right.
But yeah, what excites me is that, there are so many different types of playlists and users can create playlists and share their taste in music. And so like I really, tell artists and churches, playlists are the new radio. Like that's where things are headed. And the great thing is that people can respond and like almost vote for their songs in real time. And because, Spotify and Apple Music, they're looking at the analytics of how a song is doing. And so if more people are listening to more diverse music, then they're going to play more of that and feature more of those songs. So yeah, I'm excited for streaming and playlists, and I know there's a lot of debate around all of that, but I think it's really made it so much easier to discover music that's outside of the radio, formula.
Yeah. So in other words, it helps with both the content distribution side for creators to be able to get their music in front of people, and then it also helps for people to have a more, a more powerful voice in promoting that content, with algorithms and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that now, like, anybody can go to Spotify for artists and upload their song to get it submitted for playlists. I mean, who would have ever thought that you can literally, my 13-year-old can go do that on his own and get his song added to a playlist that has, 100,000 followers, and then get discovered by thousands of people without really like doing any kind of other push, So yeah, I think it's such a great tool, and so much easier now for any artist, any creative to share their music than ever before. So it's pretty exciting.
Yeah, no, for sure. And on the consumer side of things, if someone's listening to this and saying, man, like I want to like promote more diverse worship music or diverse music within the Christian world of things, they can just say, all right, well, I'm just going to listen to what I like to listen to. And that in and of itself is a vote. Whereas before it was like, with the radio channels, you had to like, hey, call in and vote for these songs, but only pick from these songs. And those ones had to be put on by labels. And so there's now this process by which, we can really actually see a more true representation of what people are actually wanting. And even like if there are smaller chunks of demographics, I feel like they will have a little bit more of a spot because it's not just the top, most profitable to the most profitable demographic songs that are going to make it, but there's all these more niches that are going to be able to have more of a spot.
Yeah, and I think a great way that, music fans can really support these artists is to create their own playlists, make them public, add these songs that are outside, those boundaries, and like all those things help, artists and their songs get discovered. So,
well, we're going to take a quick break here to hear from this episode's sponsor. Hey Praise Hands, this is your host, Robbie Valderrama. If you are a forward-thinking Christian leader and you've got questions about this episode, another episode, or you just like to figure out how to implement these concepts in your life or your organization, I would love to meet you. You can visit thechurchahead.com to schedule a free 30-minute video call. Let's do it. Now back to our show.
So if you're looking at, from your perspective as the owner of Marketing with Wisdom, you help churches and help individuals and artists get their music out there, and as well as Indie Artist University, helping people get tools, courses to be able to learn more about their craft. If you're looking at this from your perspective, what is your vision for the music of the church? What would you like to see it look like in maybe 15 or 20 years?
Yeah, I mean, in the past few days, I've talked to probably 2 or 3 large churches in the U.S. and also outside of the U.S. And, I even told some of them, like, what I'm really excited about is churches writing their own music these days. And because I get probably contacted by 2 or 3 churches a week, releasing their own music. And a lot of them, this is their first time doing it.
Yeah.
And so that's really awesome to see. And I think we're going to see more and more of that, of original songs coming out of these churches that maybe don't have a celebrity pastor, they're just a normal church.
Are you allowed to do that?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, they're just a normal church. They are valuing creativity within their church and cultivating that community, and they're wanting to share that with the rest of the body. And I think that's such a beautiful thing. And I really hope to see more of that. And that's really like my heart in creating these resources, to be able to equip them, whether they're indie artists or churches, to be able to do it right. Because you put so much work into writing the songs and getting them produced, but then afterwards, so many artists and churches are like, let's just throw them up on iTunes and Spotify and let our church buy it and stream it, but they don't know what else to do to really get it out there. And so I think there's going to be more and more independent releases that are successful and reach, thousands and millions of people. And that's also sustainable, and that will continue to fuel the younger generation and really inspire them to write their own stuff and, produce their own stuff. And so I hope to see more people, releasing music than just like the top artists. So
I want to ask you a question specifically about marketing and advertising. Last week on the show, we had somebody named Dr. Michael Schluter. He's an economist and he's a peacemaker. He had some incredible things to say about the church and economics. And one of the topics we talked about was commercial advertising and how a lot of times in this day and age, it can be really used to actually have negative effects on relationships and kind of say, hey, you're the man, you need this, you deserve this, and things like that. As a Christian who's in marketing, how do you use marketing in a way that is a positive force in society instead of one that, maybe creates a false sense of reality or ego that that ends up not being helpful?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we make it super clear up front that we're a faith-based agency and that we're passionate about helping those organizations and artists that have a mission-minded strategy, and they're driven by a specific mission, not I want to be famous. Like I don't want to work with artists that just want to be famous. Like I'll just be very blunt. And I probably turn down about 80% of the people that reach out to us, because like I want to work with people who have that passion to advance the kingdom and really make a difference, a positive difference in this world. Then like I want to make a lot of money. I want to, get on the top CCLI chart. I mean, I've heard it all. So,
so maybe that's your spin-off company called marketingwithego.com. You just give all those 80%.
I'm going to buy it right now. Thanks for the idea.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I mean, I guess for me, like I really want to equip and help the good guys out there, the people that have pure motives and pure hearts and want to do it for the kingdom. And thankfully, like I'm not, in a situation where I have to just take on any client because I need, the money. We're able to be selective in working with who we really feel like we can align with and partner with and be excited about, on both sides. So.
Yeah, one of the things that I've always appreciated about you, speaking of partnerships, is your emphasis on just relationships. And I love your open-handedness with, what you do. Can you talk about how you, approach relationships in the context of business?
Yeah, I guess, for me, I always look at what I do as, it's bigger than me. And it's so much better to work with and collaborate with other people than try to do it all myself. And I know I'm not good at everything. And so, and I don't know why, like, I've kind of become this way, but like I love gathering people for the same mission and purpose, and like introducing people to each other. And I always feel like there's something that comes out of that, you bear fruit from, whether it's indirectly or directly. But I guess I've never like had that poverty mentality of like, I have to keep all my relationships close, and I'm not going to really, I don't want this person to know this person because, I don't want them to like do business together or whatever, I'm always just like, my antenna's always up on like, okay, how can I connect this person with this person? Or is there a way I can accomplish this, but also like see this other person win and involve this other person, So part of it is, I think, how God's like wired me over the years. Like even my first like concert ever that I've put together back in, when I was a senior in high school, I brought together 2 different high schools that were in the same town, like rivalries, and 5 different bands and different like nonprofits together and businesses, and like saw this really special event happen, and many people come to know Christ for the first time. And so I guess like I always look at it as like, how can I make the biggest kingdom impact, not how could I make the most money for myself, or how can I make myself look the best. I guess for me, like I don't really feel like I deal with that ego side as much as maybe like some people do. Like
it's all the domain name.
Yeah. I like being behind the scenes, and like I actually don't like being like interviewed and being on video and things like that. But God's made it kind of like, God's told me over the years by opening up doors to do it that like He wants me to do this. So I do it because, like I want to encourage somebody, not because I like being in front of cameras and mics.
No, that's so good. Well, anything else that you want to share with our listeners, or any special ways that people can find out more about what you're doing, Wisdom?
Yeah. I mean, I would just encourage listeners to, just don't be afraid to step out and just go for it. I think there's so many pressures, outside pressures and internal pressures, especially with, social media nowadays, that like we compare ourselves to somebody else and their success. And, that often can prevent us from stepping into what God calls us to. And I heard somebody recently say that God doesn't make extras. And so if you compare yourself to a Lauren Daigle as an artist or singer, like you don't need to do that because God didn't make an extra Lauren Daigle. Like you need to be you and what God created you to be, Right. So I think, there's so much of like this hesitancy because we tend to compare like somebody else's, 20-year journey to like our 1-year journey or, the platform we have versus what Chris Tomlin has, So I want to encourage people to just step out and, just be faithful in the little things. I think I read that somewhere in the book. Just be faithful with what God's given you and he's going to open up the doors at the right time, And if you want to kind of look into like what we do, you can go to marketingwithwisdom.com, and then indieartistuniversity.com is this online platform that we've built to offer courses online on demand for artists and churches who want to learn how to do things right on a small budget, whether it's like how to set up publishing for yourself, how to market your stuff, how to utilize social media as an artist. We cover all those topics. So.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, Wisdom, thanks so much for sharing your story with us. I really appreciate your perspective on actually all 4 of these topics that we talk about. This episode, probably more than any that we've done so far, has talked about church, race, music, and economics. And I appreciate just how you're a trailblazer. You definitely are not afraid to take a concept and then just run with it, even if nobody's doing it. Just like when you started All About Worship podcast, and I think the church as a whole has really benefited from your obedience to what God's put in your heart. And I think it's an inspiration for me and everybody listening to this. So thanks for hopping on today.
I appreciate that. And thanks for the opportunity. And I look forward to having you on my podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Look forward to it.
Well, there you have it. Now that you've had a chance to hear Wisdom's heart, I'm sure you're just as glad as I am that there are people like him shaping the next generation of the church. If you have feedback on this episode or have a guest that you think should be interviewed, drop us a note at praisehandspodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you. Also, if you haven't already, please take a moment to rate and review this show on Apple Podcasts. This helps put us in front of so many more people, so thank you in advance. Lastly, text the word Robbie to 72727 to get a weekly text from me every Monday with what I'm reading. Praise Hands, thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Robbie Valderrama. We'll see you next week.